Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing Apocalypse Now. This film came out in 1979. It was directed by Francis Ford Coppola. When I think about movies, like these big movies like this, the really ambitious ones that require a lot of people in order for it to be pulled off, any movie period to me it's amazing if it can come together at all in any sort of cohesive manner. Because you have to understand the amount of work that goes into making a project like this is ridiculous, and people don't realize how many people have to simultaneously all come together, and the collaborative efforts just need to work. There has to be money. So many things have to fall into place for things to be able to work out. And when I look at this film, I feel like they were able to achieve what was almost near impossible. I feel like the luck was really against Coppola the entire time with this project, because it did take years to make and there were so many obstacles standing in the way. From major weather restrictions, destroying sets, to going way over budget, to the main star, Martin Sheen, having a near fatal heart attack. Coppola also having a lot of stress and breakdowns himself, so there was just a lot going on here. And I can imagine if I were on that set as, like a crew member or something, I would think to myself, this could be the one. This is going to be the one that breaks Coppola, the one that completely ruins him and he's laughed out of Hollywood or something like that. And yet somehow it did. It did come together in this really ridiculously harmonious way, whether out of passion or madness or a mix of both, likely. And I feel like there is something mystical, of course, within the film, but also mystical in terms of what was surrounding the film, in terms of the making of it. It was like something miraculous did happen out there in that jungle, and I think it led to perseverance that I don't think that Coppola or his crew knew that they had. Perhaps in their own way, they were able to face their truths and face themselves creatively as well as spiritually, while the rest of reality and the worlds that they knew back home just kind of blend into the background. And I think out of that, something incredible was born, and that would be Apocalypse Now. For me, this is Coppola's greatest achievement, without question, and I do think it is one of the great American films ever made. There are many war films that have come out that are quite critically acclaimed, especially out of Hollywood. And while many of them I think are impressive technically and even artistically and do have the cohesion that I'm looking for, of course, I feel like few ever push to the outer stratosphere of consciousness in the way that a film like this does. You have films like Saving Private Ryan and The Deer Hunter. We will say those are classic films and very grand and spectacle, very well made for sure. But to me, they deal with war and morality and facing death in a way that doesn't really ask anything of me. It kind of reduces death and darkness of the soul and all of that to a sort of one-dimensional ultimatum. And it's about how that ultimatum affects certain characters in the films, but more in an external way, more in an earthbound sense. Apocalypse Now to me is just more evolved. It's more aware of consciousness and that concept. And it is, I hate to say this, but it is true, really. I mean, this movie is more woke. This film to me is a lot like Aguirre, The Wrath of God in terms of philosophy, more about exploring internal darkness and power and all of those things rather than the external things that lead to it. This is a movie that not only faces darkness, but it enters death's realms almost like entering some sort of great temple during like a liturgic peak or something like that, and you have to live within that darkness in order to be freed of it. It kind of made me think of that quote towards the end of The Sopranos where Paulie says something like, "In the midst of death we are in life," or is it the other way around? I love that line. The difference between life and death in many ways are not so different. And, darkness can come from light and light can come from darkness. And rather than fear death, this film is about the acceptance of death. And it's done through this filter of this sort of psychedelic allegory where America, in a sense, is more like Kansas and Cambodia would be Oz. The opening of the film, of course, is iconic, where you have all of these jungles set ablaze while you hear The End by The Doors playing. And to me, this song gives you everything you need to know in terms of the film's philosophy and what you're in for. It's all in the lyrics, it's all in the feeling of the song. And excerpts are used throughout the movie as a way of sort of embodying the journey a little bit better. And as many know, The End is, of course, one of my favorite songs of all time. And it has been ever since I heard it for the first time in its entirety. It's important to me because it's a song that feels like pure transcendence. It feels like when you're listening to it, it feels like you're passing from a conscious state into the next stage of whatever it is, after death. And you're leaving behind this dimension, this bitter earth. And the song takes you, it feels like, through this very psychedelic labyrinth. It's a very meditative journey. It's a journey where all the feelings on the emotional spectrum sort of liquefy and merge together. And then after a while, all of that starts to become intense and more intense. And as the music climaxes, it all bubbles to the surface, and the darkness of the soul emerges in such a way that it is suddenly freed. And to me, that is the crux of what the Doors stood for, their philosophy as musicians. And that is what Apocalypse Now stands for as well. There are a lot of obstacles in life, but really facing yourself at the end is really the ultimate test. That is, the ultimate is the ego death. And you can say this film is about war, and yes, on a literal level, of course it is. And a lot of people have had the conversation, is it a pro-war film or an anti-war film? And to me, those are all kind of boring questions. I don't really care about pro-war, anti-war, anything like that, because I think to choose either or is to dismiss the complexity of the film entirely. To me, the Vietnam War is almost more like the framework for dealing with mortality in a very existential sense, and how we can see that interpreted through different characters, specifically the character of Willard, who is the protagonist, as he's exploring the 7 circles of hell. War does work for this particular moral conquest because war is that heightened version of humanity's great struggle, a heightened sense of reality. It's closer to the chopping block. Obviously, it forces you to confront things that you normally wouldn't. However, I think that this film is open to a lot of different interpretations. For me, it's more like it's taking a long, very heroic dose of LSD and all of the little confrontations you have, observing the human race as it distorts right in front of you. And you move deeper and deeper into the psyche, which is represented by the jungle, until you get to that ego death. As I said, our surrogate for exploring this odyssey would be Captain Willard, who is played by Martin Sheen, who really is, he's our tripper, our explorer. And I do love that, in the making of it, Martin Sheen talking about how he didn't really understand the character. So he talks to Coppola about it, and Coppola just said, the character's you. I love that. The character's him, it is us, all of that. He is the quiet observer. So we can sort of project ourselves onto him. He is preparing himself for the ego death. He is somebody that has come close to facing it before, very close to the point where he's almost desensitized to it. He's almost accepted it. And so that is why he's ready to transcend. I know that Harvey Keitel was originally cast in the role, but that he was recast as they were filming. And honestly, I think that was a very smart move. I love Harvey Keitel, of course, but I think Sheen has something in the face that is really magnetic. He is kind of, those eyes of his are really round and very piercing, and he has the ability to really embody that keen observer. And I feel like you do need to cast a lot based on face and expression in this, because his character is kind of very withdrawn, and I just don't think that Harvey Keitel quite has that. Sheen is very stoic and very tainted naturally by the horrors he's seen, but in a strange way, he has a boyish quality. There is kind of an innocence and a childlike quality to his eyes, which is kind of the great contradiction. And really, the film is just him going upriver to Cambodia, and he is observing all sorts of behavior from soldiers, from natives, observing all sorts of facets of greed and amorality, losing oneself to pain, losing oneself to the weakness of power and instant gratification, clinging to material possessions because it's all you have left is the memory of your material possessions, and clinging to that control while you are on that chopping block. We see this through some very interesting scenarios. Of course, I'm thinking about the scene with the women performing, and they're all screaming and excited for them. The wonderful scenes with Robert Duvall as well. But the film has a very soporific sort of quality to it, very dreamlike, where it feels like we're just kind of lost in this purgatory state where time dissolves and there's this sort of haze around everything, and the senses feel very heightened. It's kind of a blend of the grotesque, but also the hypnotic beauty of the jungle as well. Even if it is very gritty and there is a lot of bloodshed in the film, there's also just there's just this wonderful contradiction, because there's a mystical quality to everything. You have music and these lights and the multicolored smoke and this sort of off-kilter imagery that is absolutely mesmerizing. The camera shots are very controlled, so they're drifting very slowly. There are a lot of camera dissolves, so it feels like everything's kind of running together where time is not very relevant. Also, one shot being superimposed over the other, so there's just this fluid quality that I mentioned earlier where all the emotions and sensations are melding. You get the sense that the people on set were maybe under the influence, maybe some more than others, but I think it's maybe pretty evident. And even in the film's third act, one of the characters does drop LSD. And so, in a sense, he's accepting that final descent into madness. But of course, the objective here is a very simple one. It is to find the wizard behind the curtain, if I'm going to continue the Wizard of Oz metaphor. Willard is looking for this mysterious, god-like figure that is Kurtz, played by, of course, Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando is one of the few that could probably embody that sort of figure because he has the charisma and the notoriety as an actor. Kurtz is a character that is, of course, from the very beginning, he is perceived as insane. And perhaps he is insane. But he's insane in a way where it feels like he has accepted darkness in a similar way that Willard is in the midst of learning to accept. So they have that common bond. Kurtz has been enveloped by the darkness. Maybe he feared it at a certain point, but he's had to sit with it and wrestle with those demons, tame the dragon, so to speak. That's what I always say. And then he's had to learn to mock it and even learn to befriend it, which shows that he's succumbed to it, but he's also risen from it. And Kurtz, to me, is that representation, that great representation of how darkness can free you and how sometimes you can find clarity even within insanity if you find that awareness within yourself. That's the tough thing about insanity. There's a fine line. And in many ways, insanity means you've lost yourself to something. But then at times there's a sort of something quite piercing about it where it heightens your awareness. And that whole sequence for me is the ultimate part of the acid trip metaphorically. It's sort of, it's riding the peak, but then after the peak where the mind goes quiet and you're forced to sit with the idea of existence as it's kind of rippling and morphing within. Willard facing Kurtz is him essentially facing his ego death. So in a way you could almost look at them as two sides of the same coin. Perhaps they are the same person, just split from one another, trying to find that other part of yourself, kind of the evolving and the evolved as it's merging into that one whole piece. The sequence is very drawn out, and it does take a lot of time for him to arrive at that acceptance, but there are parts of this whole sequence for me that are just magnetic, especially the scene when they first arrive and all of the natives are staring at this boat as it's slowly drifting in. An amazing sequence. Just think about the moment, that moment of fear and tension, but also beauty while consciousness is sort of unraveling. But then there are parts of it, and I think I may just need to watch it again to really solidify my points on this, but there are times when I don't feel that the scenes with Kurtz actually are fulfilling the ego death in the way that satisfies me. There's just a thinness of it for me that just isn't quite feeling very palpable. I'm really wanting to pierce through mortality as a concept as a viewer, and it's just not quite arriving there for me, but it's still very well done. But maybe the meditative sections of it are meant to have that sort of thinness and that quietness to them where it feels kind of empty, as if the peak is over. So that's when everything goes really quiet and you're forced to kind of confront a lot of things within yourself. And so really maybe we're just soaking the experience in as Willard is starting to emerge and become reborn. I think using psychedelia as the framework for exploring the self narratively in a movie is something that just works more than anything if you know how to do it right. If you are experienced or you have that kind of perceptiveness or whatever, you already have something that a lot of people don't have. And then when you combine it with the immediacy of war, that's also an experience that a lot of people don't understand. Being able to push past death as this external thing, to me, is something we don't see enough. And I think a lot of it is because people just don't want to explore death because there's a natural fear there, not wanting to explore the things that you don't understand. And in a heroic dose with LSD or whatever, as it's used in the film, you do come close. You come very close to facing all of the things that you normally don't encounter. Again, with a higher dose where you're really obliterating the senses, obliterating all that you've known to reach the very core of the self, the primal self, pushing past madness and you know, causing the mind to unravel until it finds that clarity. It's work. And to me, this film just gets it. It achieves it in a way that few films do. It is so ambitious. And I mean that both, you know, aesthetically and just in terms of the scope of everything, but also the fact that it is able to dive so much deeper. It's like diving into the womb, it feels like, in a way where we're, in the words of Jim Morrison, you know, riding the snake. Becoming the beast and facing the unknown so boldly is just captivating, and done so in just this very delirious sort of way. When I watch the film, it feels more spiritual. I'm experiencing it through my spirit rather than through the flesh. When I watch it, I realize that death is something that maybe I've already experienced or I'm already experiencing. And if you are able to come to terms with that in life, then I think you've achieved a lot more than most people ever will. And I hadn't seen this movie in its entirety since I was maybe a teenager. So this was really exciting to revisit. I did not expect it to be as good as it is. And so, yeah, if you haven't seen it, then I highly recommend it, but also just to revisit it and remind yourself of how good of a film it really is. And that is my review. Thank you all for listening. All of my social media information is below. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.